Welcome back to another episode of the Ram's Den. Today I'm joined by two very, very special guests. I always say special guests, but today it actually, really is, especially, no offense, George, but one very, very extra special guest, because we got Ronnie Lee and George Martin, and both here to have a good discussion about a very controversial topic. So welcome both of you.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for
great
coming.
to be here.
Yeah, no shade on you, George. It's just, Ronnie's been doing this for 50 years, so it is pretty 50 years, mate.
He's one of the OGs, mate. No,
Unbelievable.
for sure. I'm looking forward to discussing with this
Not
with
this
him.
specifically. We didn't have the internet.
Oh yeah.
We just used the smoke signals and stuff like that in my day.
Yeah. I was going to say messenger pigeons, but obviously not, right?
Not messenger
Obviously
pigeons.
not.
No, not at all. No, it would be very vegan. No.
No.
Yeah.
But so Ronnie, for people that don't know who you are, let's start with you. So you've been an animal rights activist for, as I said, over 50 years. You were one of the, if not the founder of the ALF, right? Or one of the founders. I don't know.
One of the founders. They were kind of six of us really at the beginning.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. So that's incredible. So I was thinking about this before, and it's like, man, you were doing this shit 20 years before I was born. That's just to me, that's just mind blowing.
Now.
You know what I mean? You make me feel I don't know what it's crazy, man. It's crazy, mad, crazy commitment. So big respect.
Yeah.
And George Martin, you run the YouTube channel Carnism Debunked. You've been an activist, animal rights activist. Is it like 6 years, 7 years?
Something like that. Yeah, I've been a vegan 9 years now. So, and I've been active. I've been like out on the streets doing activism probably the last like 6 or so, and I've been posting on social media like since I went vegan, kind of thing. So,
awesome, man. Awesome. So yeah, and you're really active with outreach, and you make these really good videos on your channel Carnism Debunked. You've got a great system that you put together for people to use, a great website for people to use and deal with the most common bullshit that people come up with, which is really good. And also, actually, I don't know if you know this, somebody in my Discord server made a Carnism Debunked bot. So you can actually just, it's really cool. So you can just literally type a code in with the excuse and it gives you your answer, like copy. It's very nice. Yeah.
Me hacking through a robot in a server somewhere. I don't know who would want that and why, but it sounds great.
So amazing. So, and we're here today to have a discussion about politics, and specifically conservative politics. And how this came about is, well, George, you've been making videos, let's say semi-regularly, on these kind of topics where you kind of say things that go against the grain of kind of mainstream veganism quite a lot. Like you call things out that you don't think are right, and especially when it comes to politics. And Ronnie, a couple of years back, you also put out a piece of content pertaining to the same topics, like conservative politics. And you guys are pretty much at, well, it seems to be opposite ends of this. So, Ronnie, a few quotes from your video. You said, if you're right wing, you might be a plant eater, but you are not a vegan. There is no such thing and never can be a right wing vegan. Veganism has to be left wing. Stop this right wing nonsense. And George, I don't have quotes from you, but I know that you pretty much say the opposite of that. You say that you can be, basically. And so, with both of you being so active and so vocal on this topic, what a great opportunity for us to find some common ground and see if there are bridges that can be built here, and see if we're just, are we talking past each other? Is, or do we agree on more than we think? I really want to know the answers and figure this out. So can conservatives be vegan? I think that's kind of the core premise of what we're going to get into. George, you think yes? Ronnie, you think no? I'm going to leave you guys to get into this, define what you need to define, disagree where you need to disagree, and let's just figure out what the hell's going on.
Sure. Ronnie, did you want to open up or shall I?
Well, I can just say something very briefly. I kind of approaching it from a kind of different angle. Now, we're all involved in vegan education, and we'd like everyone to go vegan. But hopefully, when we get a sufficient number of vegans, we educate enough people to go vegan, we could actually get a vegan administration in this country. And wouldn't that be wonderful? If we get enough vegan politicians and enough vegans to vote for them, we'd have a vegan administration. And so we'd have to look at the kind of policies that administration would bring in order to protect animals. And I'd say that really those would have to be left-wing policies, because we'd very much have to control the economic system, because we'd have to put controls on lots of things. We'd have to bring in a lot of controls, for instance, to protect the environment. We'd have to bring in a lot of economic controls on what was sold, for instance, and stuff like that. And that's all against right-wing thinking that wants freedom of the market. So a government, a vegan run government, would have to be left-wing in its operation in order to protect animals. It couldn't be right-wing. It couldn't follow right-wing economic policies. I mean, there's more I could say, but I don't want to keep going. You see what I mean? So over to you, Joe.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to say I'm not here to represent either wing. I'm actually a centrist politically, and I believe there could be merits of left-wing policy that could help animals in a certain way. But to say that it is specifically a left-wing movement and that you can't be a right-wing vegan, I think there's far too many inconsistencies here that we could point out. So I base this kind of thing that you said, you can't be a right-wing vegan, I guess, around sort of 5 basic principles. One, I believe that it's actually speciesist to say that veganism is a left-wing movement, because for me, veganism is just a moral obligation. And if you wouldn't say that not raping or not stealing or something like that is not specifically a left or right-wing thing, you're just saying that caring about leaving humans alone is just a moral obligation. If you're saying there's this political aspect to leaving animals alone, it's like you're othering animals. So that's one thing I'd say. Another one, sorry, I know I don't want to kind of, dance around so many points here, but I just have to say the 5 things here just so I can get them off a list. The other thing is, I think to hold the position you hold, Ronnie, is actually counterproductive to the growth of veganism and the size of the movement. If you're wanting to try to get people to be vegan, but then you're just saying to be vegan, you have to have your relatively fringe views in comparison to the global population, we'll end up with no vegans. The third thing is, I remember you said in your video that it can't be right-wing because of veganism is an anti-oppression movement, and obviously sexism, homophobia, racism aren't compatible. However, so much sexism, racism, homophobia comes from the left right now, and I'm happy to discuss those during the discussion. So we can go into those perhaps later. Another thing is, I'd say there's no way to actually apply this position consistently, because every single view that you have, Ronnie, would actually be considered oppressive to millions of people worldwide. So if you think that, you can't be right-wing and vegan because, it's an anti-oppression movement, then you couldn't be a left-wing vegan either to so many people worldwide, because right-wing people vote the way they do because they see leftists as oppressive. They see things like the socialist economic system as oppressive, gun control, for example, they see that as oppressive. So there's all those things. And then the final thing I'd say that I'd base my counter argument around to your video where you said this, Ronnie, is that most leftists aren't even vegan. They're carnists. 99.999% of leftists on this planet aren't even vegan. So if anything, Carnism is the leftist movement. You can't say veganism is a leftist movement if most carnists aren't even, if most leftists aren't even vegan. So that makes sense to me. So David, I know I just made a load of points right there, and I don't know if you want to perhaps focus on one specific point that we can go over. But those would be basically how I'd counter Ronnie's position on this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like honestly, you must have left something out there, because this was really weak. I mean, you just went into no detail. You seem very ill prepared, and just like you've not been thinking about this at all. So, I don't know what to say. All right, so there's 5 points. I wrote them down because
thank you. That's good. Yeah,
I wanted to keep up myself, and Ronnie, I don't expect you to keep up with 5 specific, very intricate, detailed points either. Because I'm struggling, so I mean, I figure you might be as well. So I guess I'm most interested actually in the first one personally. So maybe we can start there. This rape or stealing you wouldn't hold, we none of us would hold those things like being against rape or against stealing as politically left or right. And actually, that's an interesting point. So why do we hold veganism as a left or right thing then, considering that it is avoiding animal abuse, just like we avoid rape and we avoid stealing? It's kind of in that same boat, I suppose. That's the point George is making. So yeah, maybe we can discuss that point first. Is there any disagreement with that, or how would you?
But I mean, what I'd say
take
is,
that?
I mean, going on to another point that George made, of course, loads of left-wing people are speciesist. Of course they are, and it isn't my view that all left-wingers hold the correct opinions. It's just that the policies we'd have to operate under to create an animal liberationist society would, I feel, have to be of the left. And I think a lot of this is to do with economics. A lot of this is to do with economics. And I said the controls that we would need to put in would go against right-wing thinking, which very much believes in the freedom of the market. And we'd very much have to restrict that if we were going to truly protect animals. And that's really, I suppose, my strongest view on it, because I think that, and this is particularly the case with regard to protection of the environment and protection of the natural world, because this is a really major area of the oppression of other animals, which I think is kind of very often ignored by vegans. We have the climate crisis, for instance. We have destruction, damage to the natural world caused by overconsumption, overproduction. And these are all things that are kind of driven by capitalism. That doesn't mean that all left-wing regimes were any better. For instance, in the Soviet Union, there was great harm done to the environment and natural world. It doesn't mean that all left-wing regimes would be any better. It's just that those measures that would have to be brought in order to secure the proper protection of animals would need to be left-wing.
That depends who's doing the controlling, though, doesn't it? Because if you have a leftist government who's sort of trying to intervene with business and the free market, and again, this could be a counterpoint. A right-winger could just say, like Friedman said, the freer the market, the freer the people, and the more individual liberty we have. And maybe that could be applicable to animal rights as well. What if you have a leftist government who says, oh, we're going to stop you, Ronnie, from setting up your vegan-friendly business here because you, as a cis-het white male, are infringing on the rights of the indigenous people and their culture, to eat animals or something like that. So I understand what you're saying, that there could be certain values of a left-wing government that could help veganism. The problem is there's obstacles as well. There are actually left-wing arguments against being vegan. I don't know how often you're debating leftists, Ronnie, on veganism, like on social media and stuff, how often you're in the comment sections talking to these people. But right now it's actually like talking to a brick wall. And if I don't see how really either government, I don't see how either side would be particularly more beneficial than the other to a vegan world, because ultimately there's just going to be people on both sides who are trying to obstruct that from happening, whether they're left or right.
I mean, I don't disagree with you on that. I think we have speciesists of all political opinions in terms of their political opinions with regard to humans. It's just that the society we would have to create in order to protect animals would be what I'd call a protectionist society. There would be lots of controls having to be put in on the economy, and that would inevitably be a left-wing system. So, and for instance, if we look at some of the kind of policies of the right, things like nuclear weapons, for instance. Now, that's support for nuclear weapons is in no way consistent with veganism, for instance. And that's just one example. Public transport. Now, a huge number of animals are killed on our roads, And when everyone who's a vegan opposes animal experimentation, or should do, and in this country we're talking about probably about 4 million animals a year that suffer and die in laboratories. The number of birds killed every year on our roads is estimated as 30 million. So we have to do something radically about our transport system. And so that means, if we're going to reduce the number of cars on the roads, we have to improve public transport. And that, to me, that means it needs to be brought into public ownership in order so that it can be made cheaper and people will use it more and not use cars. And once again, that's left-wing thinking. So we have to have these controls in order to properly protect animals, and that and all of those are kind of, I would say, left-wing in their nature.
Well, with the left, you also get more likely to do bailouts. I mean, you're talking about the protection of businesses, but Biden's just injected $1 billion into the US meat industry. So some vote for the animals that was from all the leftist vegans who are all over my Facebook saying, you have to vote for Joe Biden or you're not vegan. First thing he does is pump $1 billion into that industry as a form of protectionism, I guess. On your point about nuclear weapons, I don't see this as a right-wing thing at all. I just see this as just a human thing. If you're against nuclear weapons, I wouldn't say that's a leftist thing. I mean, Kim Jong-un, he's a massive leftist. He loves his nukes. He's got his finger hovering over the red button right now. So, Ronnie, I don't see that as applicable towards a left or a right-wing thing. Maybe you have a point on the transport. I don't know. As I say, I do think that there's nuance here, and in a vegan world, we would have to sort of see where we stand on whether it's left or right with regards to those certain things, and maybe the left is better in one way and the right is better in one way. But certain things here, I think you're wrongly associating with the right, like the nukes thing.
It tends to be something that's much more supported by the right. The same as this kind of idea of the market controlling everything, which is obviously the idea of neoliberalism. We couldn't have that in a vegan society. We couldn't have that in a vegan society because.
Do you not think? Sorry, go on, Ronnie.
So if we were to form a government, which we would love to have a vegan-run government, it would very much have to be a government of the left. Because the other thing is, as well, is if you're going to have, if we're going to have kind of less stuff, if we're going to reduce our impact on the environment and on the natural world, it means that we have to radically reduce consumerism. We all have to kind of have less, because that comes from the natural world, and so that impacts the extraction of those things, impacts on other animals. The processing of those things impacts on other animals through the energy of the industry, and the transportation of those things impacts on other animals. So we'd have to get away from this idea of consumer society. So if there's less to go round, then in order so that people can even survive, we'd have to have a redistribution of wealth. And once again, that's a left-wing idea. And although that sounds like, I'm just talking about people, it is something that would be inevitably would have to happen if we're going to properly protect animals.
I think this is more of a thing we can think about when we actually get to a vegan world. But for you to say right now that veganism is a left-wing movement, when leftist governments, if anything, are being counterproductive to a vegan society, I don't think that's something you can say. Look at Cuba, for example. Every restaurant is run by the government. Everyone gets sent a ration pack in the post. There's no competition for businesses. There's no freedom of market. So, like with the plant-based, in a capitalist society like America, we've got companies like Beyond and so on who are changing the face of this. And you get things like lab-grown meat coming through, and there's competition. And we want to be the best lab-grown meat company, and no, we want to be the best. And you get that actual exchange of ideas that can actually push towards a vegan world. If anything, you could say that the whole control of the market thing could actually be an impediment to that. Do you not think?
Well, of course, it depends who was running it, but if we're going to, what we're doing is educating as many people as possible to become vegan. We're all doing that, right? So that eventually we can have a vegan administration, and I say that the operation of that administration would have to be left wing in order to properly protect animals. Now, I don't disagree with you about other countries that claim to be left wing and that they're harming animals. In fact, nations of all political persuasions are speciesist and human supremacist, and all of them are doing horrendous harm to animals. The only way we change that, well, anywhere in the world, is to educate more people to go vegan. So we eventually can have vegan administrations everywhere. But then if we look at how those administrations operate, they would have to operate in a left-wing way because of the controls they'd have to bring in.
Yeah, and I think once we get to a vegan world, Ronnie, I'd be happy for you to come into government and put this system in place. But right now, I really don't see this as a thing that's actually pushed us towards a vegan world. I think right now it's anti-speciesist education that's doing that. I don't think it's left-wing politics that will do that.
I agree with you. We've got to educate people to be opposed to speciesism, absolutely. But kind of, let me give you an example of where there's kind of where people get confused in their thinking. I mean, there was a group, there still is a group called Vegan Conservatives. You've probably heard of them. Now, when you look into the members of that group, the title vegan conservatives is wrong. It should be plant-based conservatives, because a lot of them are involved. All right, so they may have gone plant-based in their diet, but a lot of them are involved in other things that oppress other animals. For instance, my local MP joined the group. He joined briefly, joined for Veganuary last year, and I was very pleased he joined. I thought, great, he's gonna try a vegan diet for a month. But he's a guy that goes shooting. He's a guy that supports HS, and all these things. So what I'm trying to say is that we kind of need to distinguish between plant-based and vegan, and this is kind of an example of that. That one of my complaints was there was this group calling themselves vegan conservatives, but they weren't vegan. Now, I agree with you. You could.
Well, no. I mean, Ronnie, I'm sorry that I've kept trying to interrupt there, but yeah, here's the point. The problem there is not that he's conservative, it's that he literally isn't vegan. This geezer's going and shoots. Of course he's not vegan. You get people on the left who say, oh yeah, I'm vegan. I only eat fish once a week. He's no different. This is nothing to do with being a conservative. This is just some douchebag going out murdering animals and falsely claiming to be vegan, of which you have thousands of people on the left saying.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there is a general problem with people calling themselves vegan when they're really plant-based. But you see, the essence of kind of conservative ideology really contains a lot of things that are harmful to other animals. Now, I'm not saying that the Labour Party is perfect either. It's not. But the type of politics we'd have to have in order to ensure proper animal protection would have to be of the left. And once again, I know I keep repeating myself all the time because of the controls we'd have to bring in over economic activity.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, let's think of a recent example that I think could sort of counter here what you're saying. Most leftists voted for Brexit, but that actually meant keeping live export in place. It was the right-wing parties like UKIP and stuff that were actually trying to leave Europe and ban live export because we had to leave the European Union in order to actually ban it. So under the leftists were all voting, if anything, to keep live export from happening because of these.
Yeah, I've got a point on that. The counter argument to that, just on the live export, is that live export doesn't just take place from Britain. It takes place from all over the EU. And some of the very worst journeys take place from other EU countries, right? And the thing is, if we're okay, if the UK is no longer in the EU, we could ban live export from the UK. But what about all those other animals that are being exported from EU countries? If we're not in the EU, we no longer have a say, and we no longer have the ability to be able to stop that. So there is a counter argument to that, that kind of, it's not just animals from the UK that suffer, animals from the rest of Europe suffer as well. And if we're not in the EU, we can't do anything about that. So this kind of the live export argument does have another side to it.
It does have another side to it, and I think this is the problem. I think there's way too much nuance here. I don't think you can just say, oh, veganism would have to work under a left-wing economic system, when we can think of recent examples such as Biden's injection into the meat industry, the live export things that counter that. But I think we've strayed a lot from the point that we were meant to be speaking about here, the first point, which was actually about the speciesism thing.
Let me summarize here. So I think just to kind of conclude here, I think tell me if I'm wrong, Ronnie. What you're saying is, in your view, that it's most likely, or in your view, it's absolutely certain that this vegan world is only going to be able to operate under left-wing policies. I would say that I personally, I would agree with you if you were saying that it's most likely going to succeed under left-wing policies. I would say, like, if I was to choose one, left or right-wing policies, and I would guess one of them is going to bring a vegan world round, I'd guess left, right? I'd say that it's like the low-hanging fruit, because there are a lot of things that, you can play on with people who have progressive values, that, they believe in a lot of things that are easy to apply to animals, whereas conservative right-wing values, it can be a little bit trickier to get them to take animal rights seriously, because if they're, so I understand, I'd say it's more likely. So I think I get, and George, you're just pointing out that that this is inconsistent. The reality is not that right now, and I agree with you too. The reality is, I don't think it is clear cut as Ronnie's making it, but I do agree that, I think we can all agree that it's most likely that it would be that way. If we were to guess in 50 years, if someone said, hey, there'll be a vegan world in 50 years, guess which type of politics are running it, I think we'd all pretty much agree that we if you would put your life savings on it, it would be left, right? Let's be honest.
I don't know, David. It depends how far the woke stuff goes, and how far they want to protect the interests of speciesists, which they do. They'll just call you, David. What if we get to a stage, David, where veganism is seen as so racist, so anti-indigenous, so colonialist and white supremacist and ableist and classist, that we have rules in place to say it's racist? Go on, David.
Hold up, though. I want you to bite the bullet on this. Your life savings are on the line. You have to choose left or right. Who do you bet it's going to be in the vegan world?
I'll say under a right-wing economic system, if I had to bite the bullet, because there's more competition for progression towards a vegan world, with products like with stuff like lab-grown meat and so on.
All right. Well, okay. Well, your life savings are on it. That's fair play. Then we've. This is interesting. It's interesting.
But I wouldn't mind which one it was. If we got that way for a left-wing world, so be it. But the point is, I would, if I life savings, right-wing economic system for sure.
Fair enough. Well, that's what I was saying. There's points from both of you that I'm agreeing with for sure. I think you're both making sense. So let's go back to that original point that I wanted to get into, because it was quite juicy and interesting for me. So, George brought up there are other morally disgusting acts, just like animal abuse, that we would never assign to a political leaning, such as rape, stealing, murder, child abuse, whatever. We would never say being anti-child abuse is left or right. So I'd like to get into, why do we then say, and a lot of vegans say that, and such as you, Ronnie, like veganism is a left thing, when veganism in itself is a stance against animal abuse, right? So let's discuss that. Like, what is the difference that makes veganism left or right, but child abuse not a left or right thing, for example?
Right. Did you want to go first, George?
This is for you, Ronnie, because because I'm ultimately making that point. So if you answer that,
I'd say it was to do I'd say it was to do with economics and with consumerism and with those things. You see, if we were talking about a plant-based world, if we were talking about a world where, say, nobody consumes animal products, it would be possible to obtain that under capitalism, even under neoliberalism, because it's just about how the market would operate. And if companies were very successful in promoting plant-based products and people were educated to consume them, that could happen. And yes, I mean, then that would be much better than we've got now. But if we're talking about the environment, we're talking about impacts on the environment, then stuff like consumerism and economic growth, for instance, those things drive the destruction of the natural world, and so we have to control those things as well. And in order to control those things means left-wing policies. So that's where it's different, and that's where that's where I would say right-wing economics are a problem when it comes to animal liberation.
Now, forgetting the economic stuff though for a moment, Ronnie, like let's say I walk past a dog in the street and I don't kick that dog in the face. Am I being a leftist by doing that? Or is that just a moral obligation to leave that dog alone?
That's a moral obligation to leave the dog alone, of course, but that is something different to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about economics and how right-wing economics drive the destruction of the environment, and how the destruction of the environment,
if people take
how that then impacts on other animals. And this is where it's so important what type of economics we have, and that we'd have to control the free market under a vegan system, because we just couldn't allow people just to do whatever they wanted to make a profit, because a lot of that would be harmful to other animals.
But all veganism is the principle what we applied there with the dog. It's just applying that to pigs, cows, chickens, and sheep. It's just personal responsibility, and it's just a moral obligation to just leave those animals alone. I think it's more of an individual thing that we're talking about here. I think you're talking like a wider system thing. But I'm saying that if anything, it's the idea that animal rights, basically, forget maybe like a vegan system, whatever, the idea that animal rights, the concept of animal rights is a leftist thing, I think that's speciesist because it's otherizing animals. Like if I don't go out and mug an old lady tonight, I'm not being a leftist by doing that. Yet leftists in the vegan movement are saying it's this leftist idea not to put a pig into a gas chamber. That's not a leftist idea. It's just the same principle. A pig, I don't want to otherize the pig there and discriminate against them by saying it takes this extra kind of layer of like politics and stuff to just leave the pig alone. It doesn't. I'm not being political there in any way, Ronnie, by not putting a pig in a gas chamber.
No, I'm not suggesting you are. But there is an area, you see, if somebody's right wing and they support right wing economics and they support the free market and things like that, then they're supporting something that drives consumerism, that drives economic growth, that drives the destruction of the natural world, and that drives the destruction of the animals that live within it. So in that particular area, which is a really, really important area, and when we have billions of animals are suffering and dying because of adverse human impact on the environment. And so we need to have an economic system that doesn't allow that. And that economic system would have to be of the left. And that is really kind of the main area, I would say, where this comes in. It's to do with how environmental destruction harms animals.
David, I don't know if you had anything more to say on this, but I guess maybe me and Ronnie are on sort of different wavelengths with this bit, because I think Ronnie's kind of talking here more about a system thing. I'm just trying to get the point across that it's just a moral obligation to leave animals alone.
Can I say that it's also an individual thing? Because you see, and this kind of goes back to us wanting to educate more and more people to become vegan so that we have vegan politicians and they get voted in by vegans, is that it's also an individual thing, because we all vote as individuals, don't we? We all vote. We're all. You see, this idea of the system and the individual. I think we change the system by changing individuals, because it's individuals who are the voters, and the type of government we get depends on how individuals vote. So I think when we educate people to become vegan, it isn't about how they behave as consumers or non-consumers. It's also about how they behave politically.
But someone wouldn't need to be left-wing to just leave animals alone and stop paying for their enslavement, would
they? Wouldn't have to be left-wing to leave animals alone. No, I agree with you. But they would have to be left-wing to vote for economic controls that would protect animals, because that's against.
So I understand what's going
against right-wing. That's against the free market, isn't it? You see, so in that area, they would have to be left-wing.
So this is what's happening here is, George, you're making the point that veganism is, you're looking at it as purely a principled individual decision to not abuse animals, and anyone can do that. It's a moral decision, and that doesn't have left or right wing. Ronnie extends the meaning of veganism out to also who you vote for, because he's also applying veganism to, for example, someone voting for something that causes environmental damage. Ronnie's saying if you do that, you're not vegan. Therefore, if you vote right wing, you can't be vegan, because right wingers destroy the environment and with their entire policy. Which, George, I think you said your counter earlier, that left wing governments are doing it just as much, which is why your point was, in today's world, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe in a future world where left wing governments aren't doing that, it would make sense. So that's kind of where we're at, basically, on that point. I think you guys are not necessarily reaching a point of agreement there. I think it's kind of So is there anything you want to? Have I missed anything there? I've summarized pretty well. I feel where we're clashing.
Kind of approach it in different ways in terms of like the responsibility of the individual, because to me it's all down to the individual, and I think that the kind of way a person votes. I mean, the thing is, I mean, to kind of be fair, I think they're somebody could have right-wing views, and I don't think they'd be able to hold those views for very long if they were, if they kind of became vegan, shall we say. I mean, like, I'll give you an example of something else that kind of perhaps explains it. Now, I quite often see vegans on Facebook, when it's somebody's birthday, and they say, for my birthday, I'm raising funds for the British Heart Foundation, because we know that the British Heart Foundation funds experiments on animals. So it's really not in accordance with vegan principles to raise funds for the British Heart Foundation. But the point is, those people don't know. They don't know about the British Heart Foundation. You see, they think, okay, that's, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, kind of once they're educated, and once someone says, well, look, you're raising funds for something that, is putting money into animal experiments. Really, if that person then is going to live according to vegan principles, they should stop doing that. And I think it can be the same with, kind of people that are right wing, that they kind of don't see the connection, that they don't understand this thing about the, how right wing economics harms other animals. And so they may kind of, genuinely really care about other animals, generally be opposed to the oppression of them, but not see that connection.
I see the same happening there with a leftist, especially with the animal testing thing. A leftist is often more likely to say something like that it's ableist to oppose animal testing, and you're an ableist if you refuse to donate to the British Heart Foundation because the animal test, because the British Heart Foundation, they test on animals, it's to help people who have disabilities and blah blah blah. So I don't see how this is a right-wing left-wing thing, really.
No, I don't disagree. You could have a left-wing person saying that, but I kind of didn't use that example in the same way. I use that example as an example of someone who, I wouldn't say that person, to be really fair, I wouldn't say the person that was fundraising, I wouldn't say to them, oh, you're fundraising for the British Heart Foundation, you're not vegan, because that person may not be aware And I think one of the things these days is because the emphasis has been very much on food, that a lot of people who are vegan, and I'd say, genuinely vegan because they're vegan for animal liberation, don't know very much about animal experimentation and the organisations that contribute to it, and so quite innocently might be raising funds to the British Heart Foundation. What I'm saying is, once that person is informed about that and they know about that, then really they should, if they're going to remain true to vegan principles, they should stop doing that. And I think that can be the same, with people who would support right-wing economic policies. They might not realise the harm that those policies do to other animals until that's pointed out to them. So,
is that not the same with a leftist, though?
Well, yes, but I'm talking about the policies, the economic policies being right-wing. You see, and so what you're doing in terms of driving, consumption, in terms of driving harm to the natural world. See, that's kind of what I'm saying, and in a sense, that's kind of, that's the same thing. If you've got policies that are actually harming other animals by creating destruction of their habitats and stuff like that, that is kind of no better really than what the British Heart Foundation is doing. So, and someone is supporting that, and maybe unwittingly supporting that because they don't really understand. I wouldn't be as harsh as to say that stops them from being a vegan if they don't realise that. Once they do realise it and understand it, then it's kind of inconsistent with their veganism for them to carry on doing it. That's what I would say.
But I guess then we'll just end up going back to the discussion we had about 5 minutes ago, whenever it was, about economic policies and how they're better or worse for veganism or whatever. But, it could be a leftist could be voting for policies that harm animals.
Yes, that's very true. And I'm sure quite often they have. I mean, we've never had a regime in the whole world, whether they are right wing or whether they're left wing or consider themselves left wing, that hasn't been human supremacist. We've never had an animal liberationist administration, and this is what we need to try to get. And the way we get that is through vegan education, and we're all involved in that, and that's brilliant. But
Ronnie, why not just say, just like a right-wing vegan would, or the not that used to think there's such thing, why not just say, I think that a leftist economic system would be better for veganism, just like a right-wing vegan would say that. Why do you go the whole way and say there's no such thing as a right-wing vegan? Why not just see nuance in this, like most other vegans do, and just say, I think this would be better?
If someone is supporting the type of economic policies that are causing harm to other animals,
but everyone's economic policies cause harm to animals right now, Ronnie, whether they're left or right. So how does that make sense? Because there could be a really good animal rights activist who's right wing, and they could point at policies that you vote for and say, Ronnie, you're not vegan because you want a socialist government who will put control on the free market and competition for lab-grown meats and stuff, and this will impede on individual liberties. Oh, and gun control, and what happens if there's a war between us and the Carnists and we can't raise up our arms and stuff? Do you see how messy this gets if you just start saying, you're not vegan if you vote this way?
Don't you think we need gun control to stop people using guns to shoot other animals? Because that's mainly what the guns are used for, isn't it?
Well, so someone who's anti-gun control would say that we need, if we are to rise up against like the Carnist machine, if it ever comes to this, we will need to be able to arm ourselves to do this. So again, there's way too much nuance here, Ronnie. You can't just say, you're not vegan if you vote this way. Where if this person is, they're not harming animals, they're not buying any animal products from the store, but they just vote for different policies than you do. And there's so much nuance, Ronnie. The political spectrum is gigantic. It's so vast. There's so many little nuanced things here and there. Like there's 3 of us right now in this room talking. Every single one of us has little differences in political views. How counterproductive is it if I say, David, you're not vegan because you voted for this party and they did this. Oh, and Ronnie, you're not vegan because you voted this way. Do you not see that as completely counterproductive?
It isn't necessarily just to do with voting. It's to do with the person's political views, isn't it? And then a person holds certain political views, and they will attempt to vote for the party that best represents those views, even though that party might not totally represent those views. I mean, I don't think there's any party that really, the closest party, to my views, is the Green Party, but they're still not anywhere near perfect. But it's just that if someone has right-wing economic ideas, right, and that means you've got the free market, that means you've got that means you've got the encouragement of consumption, because that's the only way capitalism can work, isn't it? By more things being produced, by economic growth and all that kind of thing, right?
But a right winger could just point at you, Ronnie, for voting Green and say, Ronnie, you're not vegan because you vote for the Green Party and they have views about protection of religious slaughter. They don't want to ban like halal slaughter, for example, because obviously they're more towards the left side, whereas a party like UKIP would ban that. So they could just say, Ronnie, you are not a vegan because you vote for Green and blah, blah, blah. Do you see?
The thing is, one of the tenets of veganism, certainly the definition laid down by the Vegan Society, is that we kind of do our best. We don't live in a perfect world. It's as far as possible and practical, isn't it? Their definition of veganism. You see, that may be the case. I'm not really sure at the moment what the Green Party's policy is on that ritual slaughter, but the Green Party's policy on agriculture is to move the country to a plant-based diet. The Green Party, it's Green Party policy to actually implement what Animal Rebellion are currently, they're doing this action against dairy, and what they're demanding in that action against dairy is exactly Green Party policy. So when you weigh everything up, of course, it's much better, for the animals to vote Green. And of course, one of the problems is with our electoral system that we haven't got. We haven't got a fair electoral system, have we? We haven't got proportionate representation or transferable vote, which would enable the Green Party to gain more seats. And they're not perfect. I still think the Green Party is a human supremacist party, but it is the case that their policies on animals are far better than the other parties. I know that because I was part of putting together some of those policies myself.
But Ronnie, this is the problem. It's a weighing up exercise. Yes. This is all it is. You said, yes, when you weigh it up and blah, 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 and it's practical and personable. An anarchist could sit in this room right now and just say, Ronnie, you're not vegan because you vote.
Well, I think that then we'd have a discussion about that, wouldn't we? We'd have to have a discussion about that if they were to say that I wasn't vegan because of vote. I'd kind of like to know how they think change is going to come about, and we can have a discussion.
Well, they would say would say that you support the Carnist system. You're going to the ballot and you're putting your slip in the box that says Green, who say we would like to rape and enslave and abuse and oppress animals in a greener way, and they would just say, Ronnie, you are supporting that. This isn't my argument, by the way. This is just what an anarchist would say.
Well, but then that kind of doesn't make sense anyway. I mean, I'd have that discussion. I've had discussions with, and I mean, there is in a sense in which kind of I sort of regard myself as an anarchist. Like the type of society I'd like to see at the end of the day would kind of really very similar to kind of what anarchists would like to see. It's just that the way I see us getting there is different than a lot of anarchists would see, because I think we have to do it through the system we have now, and we have to be the ones that take over. We have to be the ones that run the show, and we have to have vegans elected. And then once we're in charge, then we can do things with the system. And that's kind of how I see it. But we're probably straying well away from.
Let me put a question to you both. Let me put a question to you both, because I already know George's answer, I'm pretty sure, but I'll ask it to both of you anyway. All right. Right now, there is no system that is an animal liberated system, right? We've acknowledged that multiple times now. It doesn't exist, and it never has existed. And hopefully one day it does exist, but we really don't know really what it's going to look like. We can hedge our bets, we can, but we don't know what the world's going to look like in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. We probably won't even, who knows if it'll still be here. But the question is, if it ended up, if there were a right-wing government that was good, that you could vote for, right? You could vote left, you could vote right. These are the two options, right? The left-wing government has not adapted veganism whatsoever. They are doing the same thing. Let's imagine it's just another version of Biden. They're like, we're going to pump another billion into the meat industry. We are not interested in vegan stuff. But the right-wing government, even with those economic policies that you don't like, they are saying, well, we're going to switch to a plant-based food system. We're going to end animal agriculture altogether. We're going to focus on plant-based innovations. Yes, it's bad for the environment, but we're putting animals first here. We're kind of like, we're putting animal agriculture on the chopping block. And then, maybe one day we'll get around to the environmental problems you mentioned. But for now, we're focusing on animal ag. We're going to eliminate it. Would you vote for the right-wing government in that case, with it obviously being the one that's going to cause less animal suffering? Or would this economic policy thing that you've been mentioning still be a problem, Ronnie? Or would you see a problem with that at all, George? Discuss that.
Yeah, I think, well, my answer is just clear. I would definitely vote for that party. I will vote if there's a party saying we will end the animal holocaust, whether they're left or right, I will just vote for that party.
Well, I guess in Ronnie's view, they would be continuing the animal holocaust because they would still be doing the environmental damage. They're just stopping animal agriculture, which is obviously like a massive, phenomenal chunk of it.
You'd have to,
right? That's so.
I think that, yes. I mean, you'd have to weigh up which of them, offered the best deal for animals, which one was going to spare the most animals from suffering and slaughter. But the thing is, even if then the decision was vote to, I mean, kind of what you're talking about is where a government had right-wing policies in other areas. They were just, I mean, but that's kind of in a sense irrelevant, because even though I might vote for that party because they're the ones that's going to abolish animal agriculture, the right-wing economics would still be a problem, if you see what I mean. And you're voting for them because they're best of it. You're voting them. You're not voting for them because you think they're great, and because I believe in right-wing economics. You're voting them because you. I mean, like this kind of policies, as Green Party policies that I'm not happy with. I would vote for them.
So what I'm understanding now is like, so what I'm understanding here, I think we're coming to a good point here. So this is not. So what your point, Ronnie, could be misconstrued as, which is why this question has really helped. It could be misconstrued as like dogmatism towards, anti-right wing, pro left wing, no matter what. And that's what I think a lot of vegans fall into, this black and white, right? Whereas what you've just proven now is that for you, it's not black and white. And I think that's really important as a message for people that, it is important to weigh up, and it is important to make a decision that's best for animals, even if you don't necessarily agree with other policies that are going in, if it can still be better for animals, right? And I think it's not that black and white. And I think that's really, really important to acknowledge. And I'm glad that we have. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong again, Ronnie. I'm trying to because you've said, you're given a lot of information. I want to summarize it and try and make it simple and see if I've got it right. So I feel that you feel the reason you make this point about, no right wings can't be vegans is because you fully believe, without a doubt, that the only way to get to animal liberation is through left-wing politics. And that for you is a no-brainer. It is not a question. And that's why you are so passionate about this topic, because it's not about politics necessarily. It's just, you're just looking at the best, fastest outcome, and you think that it is through left wing. And that's where the passion's coming from. It's not anywhere else. It's not just some blind devotion to one political party or something. It's that you genuinely believe that is the way, and that's where it's coming from, right? And I think that's respectable. I think there's, why not be, so passionate about that if that's truly what you believe? And George, you're coming in and saying that you disagree with that, basically, and that you've made your points as to why you disagree with that. And we've not really found much common ground, I suppose. Judge, you don't really budged, George, and Ronnie's kind of gone through the points, and you've kind of criticized them, but no one's really budging at this point. I mean, I don't know, George, have you like, for example, you were very, very critical of Ronnie's points with those 5 points you made. Are you more to, like, I don't know, swayed at all at this point by his responses?
No, not really. Apart from there's certain stuff that I would agree with him on, perhaps, but those would have been my positions maybe from the start. Like I would agree, like in a vegan world, there would be certain policies that veer more left, which would help animals more. The problem is, I also see policies and ideologies and principles that veer more right that would actually help animals more. What I say is, without the left and the right wing, the bird can't fly. So for veganism to take off, we need this bird to be going like that. Ronnie's bird, vegan bird, would currently just be going, and it would just. So what I think we need is the bird with the 2 wings, and I think that Ronnie's views here would actually be counterproductive, because he's saying to a whole section of people, probably like 98% of people in the world, if you're talking about maybe like 95% or so, because if you're talking about Ronnie's version of leftism, it's only a small part of the world, like mostly the Western world, who hold his beliefs. You're shutting out basically the whole world from identifying as a vegan. So I agree with certain points of Ronnie's, but I don't agree that his views here are helpful, and I haven't budged in that way.
Ronnie, would you say that, okay, your original position was you cannot be a right-wing vegan? Would you say that after this conversation that your view is more, it's some right-wing policies are inconsistent with veganism, but there are right-wing vegans? Or are you still hardline, there's no such thing as a right-wing vegan?
Well, I think somebody could be right-wing and vegan briefly until they kind of realise the harm that right-wing economic policies do to other animals. That's the problem. And yes, you see, the thing is that yes, we want as many people as possible to become vegan, but we actually want them to become vegan. We don't want them to become a lesser version of it. And I think part of being vegan is to be concerned about those animals that do suffer and die, because of consumerism, because of the capitalist system that drives economic growth and stuff like that. And so, we as vegans, we do need to be concerned about that. That's part of the overall vegan ethic. Those animals matter as well, and it's only really left-wing policies that are going to deal with that. That doesn't mean that every left-wing government is going to, be decent and is going to properly protect animals, but the policies we need in order to put those animals need to be policies of the left.
What do you make of George's point of before? I don't think you responded to it necessarily. He was mentioning that the free market and the competitiveness and the capitalism basically is driving a lot of innovation around plant-based alternatives, which people are, regularly now, like for example, plant-based milks are just almost completely replacing cow's milk in the UK. Like the industry is completely dying out because of this. George would argue that wouldn't have come about, or may not have come about in a, the kind of controlled government that you were kind of arguing for. And what do you make of that? I mean, does he not have a point there at all?
Well, we have the system that we've got. We all kind of really live under a capitalist system, and that's the only way that things can operate. So, like, yes, within that system where people are doing things like that, it's great. It's just like the vegan cafe could be described as a capitalist enterprise because it has to operate within capitalism, and that's great as well. But what I'm saying is that if we're going to have a society where animals are properly protected, then, because the other thing, yes, okay, so under capitalism, people can set up these enterprises, but there's horrendous harm being done by capitalism as well. The reason, it derives all this kind of, this idea of economic growth. Everyone's on about it. I mean, even the Labour Party are on about it, to be fair, of course. But then I consider the Labour Party to be pretty right-wing as well, to be honest. This is the kind of death knell for the natural world. We have to live in a much more simple way. We have to share resources. we have to be far less materialistic, and all that is in line with left-wing views. I mean, not all left-wing views, but but those views are of the left, and that economics is of the left. That's what I'd say, and it's kind of not. It's something that obviously one thing we all agree on is that we all have to do our utmost to educate other people to go vegan. But when that kind of happens, that is, it's only under that kind of administration that would be of the left that we can actually properly control these things that are harming other animals.
But does materialism and stuff like that not exist on the left? I'm seeing that a lot with like left-wing groups recently.
Yes.
For example,
Yes,
Black Lives Matter with
it does
they
exist on the left.
splashed
What I'm
$6
saying
million
is
of
that
their donations on a mansion.
although
You saw
those
them in
things
that picture of them
do
clinking
exist,
champagne glasses recently. Like, is this really a right-wing thing?
well, yes. I mean, there's there's materialism on the left as well, and as I said, the Labour Party it's always banging on about economic growth the same way as the Tories are. But the idea, the idea of degrowth, the idea of distribution of wealth, which you have to have if you have degrowth, the idea of controls that properly protect the environment, all those things are ideas of the left. I'm not saying that every left-wing person is great. I'm not saying that every left-wing party is great, at all by any means. The vast majority.
It'd be bad though, Ronnie, wouldn't it, if if we redistributed all the wealth to the human supremacists? Yeah, wouldn't it be better to have a load of rich vegans who controlled stuff?
Well,
I think.
Not that go on.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think I can see what's going on, and I'm just going to tell you from like top down because I'm watching this and listening to you guys carefully. I think I can see what the real problem is here. The problem I see is that what we're all talking around is that this system, that this vegan system that does all the environmental protection, that is anti-consumerism, that is trying to slow things down, that is looking at the environment, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in any left-wing political groups. It doesn't exist in any right-wing political groups. It doesn't exist. So Ronnie, by your logic, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, basically right now, anyone who votes isn't vegan because none of them, whether they vote left, right, it doesn't matter, that none of them are voting for the system that we want, right? They're all voting for something that is causing a problem. And I think this is what George is kind of getting at here. It's that it's a lose-lose wherever you vote. Now, obviously, Ronnie, your argument is that one of these is clearly better, right? That's your point. One of these is clearly the better way to vote. But George's point still does stand that either way, it is an anti-vegan vote. It is any way you vote is anti-vegan. So I think something we can all agree on, and I guess where you can make closing points as well. But I think something we can all agree on is that until there is a political group and a political system that is being pushed that is actually vegan, I think when that happens, we're all going to vote for it, right? No matter where it lies, no matter where it sits, no matter who it is, we're all going to vote for that, right? We can all agree on that, right? That's 100%. What we're disagreeing on is what we do until that point, and whether somebody can be considered vegan or not until that point. This is where it's a disagreement, and I think it's in a way, I kind of, this was an interesting discussion, but in a way, I am empathetic to George's point that it does feel counterproductive to hold people to such a high standard when there currently is no system that is actually a vegan system to vote for. I feel like it does bother me a little bit that we would hold people to such a high standard when really no vote is a vegan vote. So that's my take, and I hope I summarized it well enough. If you guys, you want to make some closing points or maybe correct something if I said something wrong, Ronnie, I guess you're ready to go. You look riled.
No, I'm not right. What I'd say, it's kind of, in terms of voting, it's kind of, the problem is that even if we don't vote as vegans, the government still gets in, and so kind of it's up to us to vote for the maybe lesser of two evils. If we don't vote for the lesser of two evils, then we may get the greater of two evils. So we weigh up, what our options are, and we vote for the party that we think is most likely to kind of move us in some way, or which kind of is kind of going to make things not get in the way so much of moving forward to veganism and animal liberation. That's the thing. I think we kind of have to vote, because we have to try to make a difference and maybe make things less bad than they otherwise would be if we didn't vote. So that's but it's not so much about who you vote for. It's about a person's sort of personal political views, and I think in particular their kind of personal economic views about how the economy should operate, just as we all have views about other ways in which animals are oppressed. If we're concerned about how animals are oppressed by a human impact on the natural world, then we need to be concerned about economics, and we need to be supporting an economic system that minimizes that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think there's any disagreeing with that at all. That's 100% right. I think the point of contention with George, which I guess you can respond or you can make your closing point, is that in George's world, it's not 100% clear which system that is right now. Therefore, it's not fair to say if someone is vegan or not based on the political beliefs they hold in a world where we have no political system that is vegan. I think is that your point, George? Basically, is that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, first thing I'd like to say is I wish we'd have talked more about the social points of the right and left today, because I really wanted to get into the topic, because I hear a lot of left-wing discussion, people in the vegan movement say you can't be right-wing vegan. This was one of Ronnie's points in the videos, because of stuff like sexism, homophobia and racism. I wanted to make the point today, if we had more time, about how a lot of that is actually coming from the left right now. But perhaps we can do that another time with different guests or whatever. I would just summarize by saying, I'm perfectly happy for Ronnie to vote the way he thinks is best to vote for the animals right now. In fact, I'm perfectly happy for every single person to do that. I guess my point of contention with Ronnie is that what's counterproductive is saying you are not a vegan if you have X political view. Because for me, veganism is just a moral obligation. It's about personal responsibility, and it's about someone saying, I do not see animals as slaves. I do not see animals as commodities, as resources. And I think you could be left-wing, you could be anarchist, you can be right-wing, you can be Muslim, Christian, Jew, you can be atheist. It doesn't matter what you are outside of the principle of veganism, which is that animals are not resources for us here to exploit.
Okay. Thank you, George, for closing statements. We can get into that. I think we can do an entirely separate podcast on the points you brought up there, but not related to veganism. We can just bring that up as a nice, spicy, controversial podcast for another time, because that sounds heavy. Ronnie, thank you so much. George, thank you so much, both of you. I hope you got through everything you wanted to get through. I feel like we went round in circles a little bit at one point, so I think we got through almost everything we were going to get through. I think we could have gone for a couple more hours, I'm sure, but it was I really appreciate both of you taking the time out to discuss this. I know it's a tricky topic. I hope it's helped some people figure out where they stand on it. Get in the comments and let us know. We'll all be there in the comments. I get very straight after it's posted, I'm sure, trying to see who agrees with who, and so we're really keen to know what everybody thinks. So please get down there and I'll leave some comments. Is there anything you want to promote, like your pages, where to find you,
George?
Yeah, sure. Cheers, guys. Yeah, check out my YouTube channel, Carnism Debunked. Please sub to that. Also follow the Carnism Debunked podcast, and you can catch me on Instagram, Carnism_Debunked. On Facebook, I'm George Martin. Ronnie?
Right. Well, let me see. One of the projects I'm involved in is a series of discussions with Wenda Shahata, who runs the Huglitz Wood Farm Animal Sanctuary. It's a series of discussions called Forward to Animal Liberation. You can find that's a Facebook page, Forward to Animal Liberation, and we've done discussions relating to veganism, animal liberation, a variety of issues. That's one of the projects I'm involved with. But one thing I'd like to say, and I say this every time I get a chance when there's people listening, is whatever people think about this discussion we've had, and whoever they agree with, and whatever their opinions. I think,
Well, they'll let us know.
Yeah, they will.
They'll let us know.
But you see, we all want to see an end to the oppression of other animals. And if we're going to do that, and if we're going to end up with getting a vegan administration that we'd all like to see, we have to educate far more people to become vegan. And that is a job that only vegans can do. And I think one of the tragedies really, in terms of vegans and veganism is that so few vegans are activists, so few vegans are involved in spreading the vegan message, but it's something that almost all vegans can do. And one of my big things at the moment is what I call community vegan outreach. That a lot of vegan outreach takes place in the centre of big cities, and that's great. I totally support that. But we need it everywhere. We need it in towns, suburbs, cities, and villages. And so, my appeal to all vegans listening is if you're not active in spreading the vegan message, get active locally where you live. If it's just distributing leaflets or door dropping or setting up an information store in the town where you live, then please do that. Get together with other vegans, because we need to spread the message everywhere. When that message is not being spread enough yet, and hopefully people listening to this will do that. That's partly important. Whatever anyone's political views, if we want to, end the oppression of other animals, we have to spread the vegan message, and all vegans can be involved in doing that.
And if you're doing this in a small farming town, maybe take a weapon with you so you can make sure.
Yeah.
Because they'll come for you. They'll come for you if you're in a small farming town. So maybe be a little bit careful if you're in one of those places. Everywhere else, you'll be fine.
Yes, I mean, possibly kind of delivering leaflets and running away quickly might be safer. It might be safer than small farming towns. Although I know small farming towns where strange enough there are quite a few vegans. I mean, we're everywhere now, so don't be afraid to get out there and spread the message.
It's great advice.
We can all do it.
Important.
And it's kind of absolutely key. It's not difficult. I think it's great when people get involved in the big actions. It's kind of marvelous, but not everyone can do that. But there's a role for everyone in education.
Totally agree. You can just literally go onto Peter's website and they'll just send you a box of flyers for free. Like literally you just go on there, say you want flyers, they'll send it, or Viva as well. In the UK, they do that.
Animal Aid as well. They'll all send you stuff, and anyone can do it. So please do that, and we'll get there hopefully.
Absolutely. Perfect. Great, guys. Thank you so much again, both of you, for being here. And I'll see you in the comments section.
Yeah, thanks both. Cheers, Ronnie, for discussing that with me.
And take care, David. Cheers. Bye-bye then. Bye.